I'm already on.
30 seconds, so.
They already had me on.
Yeah, what's the problem?
Call this Sebastian Budget Review Advisory Committee meeting to order, 6 o'clock on Monday, January the 7th, 2019. We'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Let's have a roll call, please.
Mr. Napier.
Present.
Mr. Herlihy.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Hall.
Present.
Ms. Ring.
Present.
And Ms. Serta. Thank you.
Nancy.
I'm here too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ms. Pete.
Present.
I guess one of the new members he called and said he couldn't make it, right?
Yes, he's out of town. He won't be back till mid-March, he said.
And Michael Frank, I guess nobody's heard from him.
I attempted by email to contact him as well as his phone number I had on the record, and I could not reach him.
So we'll have Mr. Frank as an unexcused absence unless we hear something from him later.
Right.
Okay, next on the agenda is introduction of members. I guess we only have one new member from last year. I'll start down at this end. Amber Serta is a new member.
Yes.
Now,
hi.
is she at large or?
Yes.
Okay. Andrea Ring, Harry Hall, Ed Herlihy, Bruce, and Nancy V. And I'm Larry Napier. The next order of business is selection of the chairperson. And the floor is open for motions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
last year we had a pretty cohesive board, so I move that we retain the current slate of officers.
I'd second that.
Okay, that would be me as chairman and Ed as vice chairman.
Correct.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify with aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimous. Congratulations, Ed. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes from the meeting of August the 6th. Are there any additions or deletions or corrections?
I'll make a motion, we accept as presented.
Second. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Now review of the fourth quarterly reports for fiscal 2018. Mr. Kilgore, you're on.
Okay, thank you. For the new fiscal year, we wanted to introduce some changes in format to the quarterly report. So I took the initiative on the fourth quarter report to go ahead and demonstrate what the reports in the future are going to look like. So as before, we have the agenda item that we'll be presenting to the council on Wednesday night with the resolution, which in this quarter, there weren't any additional adjustments that needed action by the city council. So this resolution just acknowledges that we had budget changes. We have a new format on the showing the budget changes. It's been talked about of having a balance before the budget change was made, show the amount of the budget change, describe what it was, and show the ending or the balance after that budget change. I did find a small error in looking it over today and resulting from questions from Nancy, who has very sharp eyes, and I appreciate that. The first item, the Oyster Point drainage, I had misstated the budget adjustment amount. That adjustment was only $6,950. This is on the second line of the adjustments previously authorized by the city manager, leaving a budget after the change of $129,100. And what she caught was at the bottom of the page, we had a subsequent adjustment that started with the balance of the 129,100. So just for the record, I wanted to know that that has been corrected. As far as the, if you want to call it an executive summary that I do, showing the status of the major funds, I kind of took an approach that if I were you, I would be wanting to see not only what the current status is at the end of a quarter, but as Chief Financial Officer, my best judgment as to where we will be if we get a certain amount of revenues or expenditures. And that way I can demonstrate to you what the projected fund balance will be by the end of the year. So at the bottom of the first little block here that presents the general fund revenues and our sources and uses, I drop down and actually, I did not do that. I'm sorry. I did it for the other funds, but I need to show then what additional revenues and expenses I would project so that your net unassigned fund balance would be, you'd be aware of that. So to the right of the schedule of the general fund summary, I show the general fund reserves forecast. And on this, I show the changes to our normal fund balance, as well as a column on the R&R. Okay, and then this is where I had shown if we get additional revenues and expenditures. Of course, at the last quarter of the year, this is the final report, so these are the numbers as best we know them. Now, the auditors are still out. They're still working on the audit. At this point, they haven't advised me of any kind of subsequent adjustments to these numbers, but there can always be that possibility that they might run across something, but I find it doubtful. So a little graphic at the bottom of the page showing the general fund revenues compared to budget and the expenditures compared to budget. On the next page, the graphic at the top left corner shows our status of our hurricane reimbursements. At the end of the fourth quarter, we had not received any money from Irma, but I did share with you that in November we got $356,000. Last week we got another $50,000. So there is still about $400,000 yet due from both Irma and Matthew. So I continue to monitor that. I'm on there a couple of times a week on the website, seeing if there's another step that I need to take to move it along. So with next year, if you drop down below that graph, you see a summary of the stormwater fund. Now, through this last year, the operating costs for the stormwater operation were not accounted for in the stormwater fund. They were accounted for in general fund, and stormwater transferred. The previous year was $700,000, so that $700,000 is, and a few operating expenditures that were charged directly to the fund are shown. So this is like our beginning balance, October 1st, for the stormwater system that will now include all the cost of the stormwater operation and capital. To the right, there's a summary of the golf course, revenues and expenditures. At the bottom left, there's a summary of the airport fund, and bottom right is the building fund. Those are our three enterprise fund operations. The rest of the document is pretty much what you've been seeing in the past. We show a brief summary of each fund. We show a further breakdown of the general fund, showing department by department. We give you a list of the capital projects. We give you a summary of all the cash and investment accounts that we have. And we give notations from each department of the activities that they had during the quarter. I did want to note that we are working on those activity reports. Mr. Carlisle has begun or initiated some work towards getting a strategic plan and operating objectives and showing some performance measures. So it's likely that over the coming months, you will be seeing some change in that section of the report, and hopefully it'll be more useful information. You can really get a sense of whether we're accomplishing what we are setting out to do. So with that, I'd open it up for questions.
I think the fourth quarter looks pretty good. Looks good for the year. And you don't anticipate the auditors coming up with any big audit adjustments?
At this point, I think they would have, we'd be aware of it.
Yeah, you
They're
should
pretty
have.
much at the point of, dropping the numbers into the statements, and they usually have those numbers verified before that. So.
Anyone have any questions of Ken? Ed?
Ken, back to the FEMA hurricane reimbursements. Where do you put that? Does that go into the general fund reserve?
It's a good question. As those expenses were incurred, we wanted to track them, of course, so we set out project numbers and we put it in one of our capital project funds. We did that both with Matthew and Irma. Of course, they each had set different project numbers so we could track it. We discussed with the auditors at the end of the year whether those requests that we had made should be recorded as receivables. And they offered what they found in looking at other agencies and how they were handling it, that they simply let the year that incurred the expenses be recorded as expenses. And when the revenues did actually get received, to record it as revenue. So there are no receivables on the books. We've already basically spent all our money. What you see is what's left over after being spent, offset by any reimbursements that we did accomplish. But to directly answer your question, it is accounted for as part of general fund on a net basis, because the capital project fund shows the expenses and shows all the offsetting revenues coming from general fund.
Did you look at the possibility of setting each of those events up as a special revenue fund? Since there's FEMA grants involved in all that?
That was
And
discussed.
then that way you wouldn't have to worry about any transfers. Because all you do, because once you made the expenditure under FEMA, you've earned the revenue back, what they're going to reimburse you, and you
Yeah.
book the receivable when you accrue the expense.
Our concern was like showing the actual cash resources of any particular fund. And it is a shortfall in the general fund because we lay out the money from somewhere. I mean, the capital project, I mean, we to have a big expenditure and we'd have to record the receivable really to show an offsetting revenue in the capital project fund. So in our judgment, it was best to go down this route.
Well, if you dump them in a special revenue fund, you count your special revenue funds, all of them you got, and your infrastructure sales tax, which is special revenue, should have enough cash to carry any deficit of cash that you would have in those FEMA funds.
But then we'd have the issue about whether it was a legitimate expenditure out of DSC. Hopefully, we've got maybe another $400,000 coming to us from the two hurricanes we have, and
You think you're going to get most of
let's hope
that?
for no more.
You think you're going to get most of that actually recovered?
Yeah,
Good.
Sooner or later, I mean, they're just so slow moving. I mean, they have like probably 15 steps of different levels of review, and then it goes from that person to the next, and you can kind of track it on their website. And I mean, there's like months between one action and the next.
Probably nothing's happening right now.
Nothing's happening now, plus they had quite a few other disaster.
They had disasters all over the
reactions to react
country.
to the last couple of years, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add one thing to that comment about the transfer. If you notice that the report before this one to City Council, when we approved the budget, we kind of outlined our general fund reserves as to, not necessarily earmark, but delegated a certain portion to emergencies, to unfunded mandates. I think that might kind of address what you're saying as far as a special revenue, because we've kind of somewhat allocated those reserves for certain emergency unfunded spending, if that helps.
Well, whatever makes the auditors happy.
True. And they're happy now, right now, so that's good.
Okay, continuing on with this discussion. The auditors don't like setting up a receivable when you spend the money rather than working it through there?
Well, the concern was that the receivables from FEMA,
Yeah, just a long-term receivable.
but
It
then,
just sits there.
but if they do end up denying the claim, then you've got to go back and adjust
prior
all the
period
records.
adjustment.
Prior year adjustment,
Yeah,
as
you have
as
to go
Larry
back and
pointed.
you have to debit to revenue. That's,
Yeah, well, you just go back and reopen and redo, but
But you have to restate, I mean,
once your books are closed though, you can't,
the accounting rules get kind of, they entrap you, so.
And it could go on past the 3-year time frame.
Yeah.
we never had that problem in private practice. You just go back and reopen and you pay up for what you got to do.
GASB's a little different.
GASB has a lot of different rules, Bruce.
I know
Believe
it
me.
does. And half of them don't make any sense to those who came out of private practice.
It is. And it is.
I mean,
and those are
you
accurate
spend
statements.
money, you set up a receivable if you have any expectation of getting it back.
Understood.
But under GASB, it has to be, you have to receive it within, it has to be pretty certain you're going to receive it within 60 days of the end of the fiscal year. If not, you can't record it as a revenue. So if you're hung up with FEMA, you really can't record it as a revenue. You have
Well, it's not revenue,
expenditures.
it's a receivable.
The advantage of the government side is, you know, would the private enterprise get like $2.2 million?
But to get the receivable, to debit the receivable, you have to credit revenue. And then if you don't get it, if FEMA denies it, you got to go back in another fiscal period and unrecord revenue, which
And then you
is,
get a report.
it's a prior period adjustment, which is going to get you dinged by the Auditor General. I mean, I understand it. The rules are complicated, and they're making it more complicated every day. Okay.
Another question. The golf course. Just, I assume, I don't want to assume anything. We're on track as far as the restaurant is concerned? We're on track as funds coming in from the restaurant rent?
Pay their rent every month on time. And the participation of the restaurant is standing room only.
Standing room only, you wait in line on Saturday and Sunday to get breakfast.
That's correct.
Tell
And
them to
dinner.
get more tables.
Well, it's not only the tables, it's help. So, you know, we're not here to manage the restaurant. We rent him a space. So, you know, it's his business to run, and we rent him space.
No, I understand.
But it's been a success so far. We're glad of that.
Yeah, most of the golfers are pleased. Any other questions?
Okay, Ken, I like the new formats. They were really, I think, an improvement. But again, you've got me confused in certain places.
Okay.
Under the general fund summary, unappropriated is just unbudgeted. Is that right?
If you remember, like 4 years ago, we
I mean,
came,
it's under the budgeted
I know.
column.
But if you remember about 4 years ago, we had the early retirement program.
Yeah.
And we assured the city council that there would be savings in the subsequent years that would pay for that program. This $91,000 in last year's budget was the final payment back to the reserves in a sense. It's not really a payment, but we didn't want to, or we wanted to show how we were going to replenish the reserves by 91,000. So that goes away. This year, we've got a different circumstance where we had an additional contingency for stormwater projects. But in the year that you're looking at here, we had that 91,000. We just wanted to set aside, not have it allocated in any department, so that we were reserving part of our total revenues to add to the fund balance, or to replenish the fund balance for the cost of that early retirement program.
Working through your terminologies and trying to figure out what it's all, okay?
It's simply saying that we would not be spending that
Explain to
91,000.
me what, under the year-to-date column then, what are receivables and inventory?
Okay. If you think even in private enterprise, if you look at your balance sheet and your equity, includes inventories, it includes receivables, less any payables against, what assets that you have. So this would represent, it actually, the 410,000 was what we had at the end of the previous year. When I looked at the balance sheet, the net of between receivables and any payables that we had were $410,000. In other words, it helped us
Okay.
in terms of our fund balance. but it
Okay,
didn't
so
put-
the receivables and inventory get us
They're
to the
non-cash
net-
items. They're not really
right, to the
available
general
to spend.
fund.
It's an
Okay,
offset. It's
to
an
the
offset
general
to the-
fund balance that has to come up through, okay. I kind of see where you're
I was-
trying to go with that.
I was really trying to tie when we report further of how much cash we had in general fund at the end of the year and investments in general fund, that number is very close, it's within $20,000 or so of what I'm showing here as the ending unassigned fund balance.
Yeah, okay, let me. On the next page, the stormwater fund summary, that beginning balance, that would be as, the date would be as of, there's no date there, beginning fund balance, is that the 18-19? So should that be 10-1-18? Stormwater fund
So
summary
you're
on
looking
the
at the
left-hand
beginning
side.
balance, the 266,000?
Yes.
That was at the start of last fiscal year. So that was like October 1st of 17.
October 1st, 17.
And so,
Okay.
and then when you come down and I speak of the ending fund balance, that is as of September 30th of 18.
Yeah, okay.
The fiscal year is what we're presenting here.
Yeah, right, okay. And that's the beginning then. Okay. Let me ask a couple of questions here that I'm trying to trace, okay?
Okay.
I'm going for the previous page, general fund reserve forecast. And you have due from the airport grants, 210,000. And if you go to the bottom of the next page, it says due to general fund under the airport, it says 65,000.
I should have mentioned this because I had a note that it didn't tie.
Or is there a difference between being due to the general fund and being a receivable from grants? Or
Well,
should
kind-
those numbers have matched? Did I miss something?
We have an airport operations fund, but then we have an airport construction fund. So all the big grants that the airport gets run through the construction fund. The 210,000 represents the amount at the end of the year that we needed in order to show cash equal to, or the construction fund runs into a negative balance because all of those programs or all of the expenditures are on a reimbursement basis. So at September 30th, the 210,000 is how much the airport construction fund was short by not having yet even a receivable because we hadn't even billed that.
Yeah, so you're
On the
running
grant,
it
yeah.
through a construction, that's the construction fund.
And they're on a July 1 fiscal year. DOTs, which
Yeah,
Okay.
affects our funding.
Yes.
And the other 65 is just due to the general fund?
Yes, at the end of the year, the airport operating fund was, actually, this resulted from the year before. It kind of got by me at the end of the year, or else I probably would have fixed it. Because it is 65,000, the airport operations fund was in the hole at the end of last year. So for cash flow and presentation on the financial statements, we moved some of the general fund cash over. It started out with a concept, well, we'll move it over September 30th, make the books look good, and then reverse it. But some of them got ahead of us here. So I have the intent of trying to whittle those down as much as possible. With the grant programs, it's just hard to keep the revenue reimbursements
Okay.
up to date because of the timing it takes.
Two more quick questions then. One under the Gulf Fund, under their resources, they get a state grant? Do you see that line almost down?
Yes, that was in conjunction with the renovations at the restaurant.
We got a state grant?
Yes. Because it was a revenue-producing facility, I guess the FDOT had available funds that they were willing to share for us when we explained to them that, is there any way you can help us with this? So they came through.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we thought so too.
Okay. Then let me ask, okay, the terminology, just, I'm trying to get used to the terminology, okay? The beginning resources, that's what you're basically saying is,
Day one of the fiscal year.
that's like their general portion of the general fund, right? That's their beginning fund balance, right?
No, this is the fund balance of just the golf course
Of just the
operation.
golf course, but that's the golf course's portion, right? Resources, but it's, they're netted along with all the other funds into the general fund, right? Yeah.
No, they're separate funds. This is an enterprise fund, so it's a
It
separate.
stands alone. All those enterprise funds stand alone. It's like a separate entity.
Yeah, but they all get consolidated supposedly up into the,
When we look at our CAFR, our Comprehensive Annual
I
Financial
swear to you, I've been
Reports,
doing this for 5 years and I still don't understand how the hell all this money disappears.
in our annual reports, the governmental accounting rules do require us to show a presentation of governmental funds versus proprietary or enterprise funds.
Yeah, you're all
So you
proprietary
probably are
funds.
remembering seeing that in your reviews.
But when you have an enterprise fund sitting at a negative balance, that money's coming from somewhere, is what Bruce is saying, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying, and it's all coming out of the
So it's a loan to,
Coming out of the general fund,
not
right?
necessarily, some of this was loaned to the golf course through general fund, and some of the dollars were loaned through
From
the building
The
fund.
building fund, right?
So they were,
And that's what we're showing at the bottom of that
that's
schedule.
correct.
All right. They will get paid back.
And they're making payments.
Well, let's, I don't want to debate that with you tonight. To me, that's a foolish statement, okay? That just won't happen.
It is happening, actually. There's 31,000 that they're paying back to building department in this budget. And they're
Yeah, so when do they start paying the general fund back?
Well, therein lies our question.
Hopefully after the building department is replenished.
As funds become available is how I would answer that.
Well, then, let's go to the golf course, okay? And show me this then. This is, I think, back on your quarter ending 9/30. It shows revenues and expenses. I think it's page 12 in your report if they're numbered.
On this quarter's report?
Yeah, this one, okay? Where the golf course fund is at the top of the page.
You talking about the summary, Bruce? The golf
Yeah,
course
I
fund
got
summary?
fund summaries, yeah. Okay, and that should be fourth quarter numbers. It says golf course fund revenue, and it's showing the actuals as 1,442,000. Yet, if I go to this summary page, that the new report, it says total revenues were 1,501,000. And I don't know how to tie that. And the
And that's-
same then, I go down to golf course fund expenses. On the summary report, it's 1,854,000.
Oh,
And you guys tell me where I go off course here, but I'm assuming total uses is total fund expenses.
yeah.
That's 1,000,007 versus 1,000,008.
No, I can directly tell you right offhand on the uses. In our bookkeeping, depreciation expense, a non-cash entry is in the total of the fund summaries that you're looking at.
Depreciation
So it
is
adds to our expenses in terms of proper accounting, but on a budget basis, it probably should, what I'm showing you on the golf course summary is more on a budget basis. In other words, this was payments out of cash on the front sheet. Now, on the revenues, we've got a difference there that I don't know offhand. About $50,000.
Yeah, I've heard you guys discuss this depreciation thing before. And again, those of us from private practice don't quite understand how you account for depreciation in a government I don't know. You guys seem to think it doesn't count, but it does.
And on your fund summaries, your
But
golf course isn't showing a balanced budget either.
Well, the only difference is, Bruce, if you would look at the audited financial statement, they have a reconciliation of, to cash, and it shows depreciation expense being added back in because it's a non-cash outlay.
yeah, well, okay. You know, what can I tell you? I'm not a full-time government employee here. I'm not spending
It just-
24/7 on this. I'm trying to tie numbers together.
It just occurred to me what the other difference is. If you notice on the beginning resources of the summary pay of the first sheet, my little rendition of a new presentation here, the sale of carts, you see 48,605.
Yes, sir.
And then in the operating expenses, I'm sorry, not the sale of carts. the pro shop sales. The 81,460 as pro shop sales is offset by pro shop purchases of 59,803 further down in the uses. You follow
Okay.
that?
Right?
But in our detail report, which comes right off our accounting system on
You
the
just net
computer,
that cost of,
they treat it differently.
they treat it as cost of goods, right?
Well,
Cost of sales.
and even in our budget, we show all our revenues, including the pro shop revenue, but then we show a little negative of what our expenses for putting the
Okay.
inventory in the pro shop are.
Okay,
And what I've done here is moved the expense down to the expense side, which is closer to the way it's actually presented in the CAFR in our annual report that the auditors sign off on. It's just a difference between our budget presentation and our CAFR.
Got it.
CAFR presentation.
okay.
Those are
Anyway,
really good questions, Bruce.
This is, I like the new presentation. Give me a while to figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe you'll let him borrow your gaffer, your blue book, and let him read the accounting section in it. It's got all the terminology and stuff included in there. It might help him some.
I think as this goes on, if I may, Mr. Chairman, this is going to become a lot easier to understand versus the old way. This is going to give you a lot more information.
Right.
Oh, agreed. There is a tremendous amount of information. It's just learning.
Understand. But, you know, our goal is to make it easier, not harder, and
Right.
provide a little more transparency of where money goes, how it's balanced out, and how it affects the bottom line of the budget that the council ultimately approved.
I like it a lot better.
Well, we do appreciate your questions, and, you know, we'll try to tweak it as we go to maybe make it more transparent to the
Any other
layperson
questions
or
on
somebody
the
familiar with
quarterly
private
summary?
enterprise.
No, I
Nancy?
just wanted to bring up that something is wrong with those fund summaries with the golf course, that your
I was looking at that.
budget,
There is something not.
the golf course isn't showing balanced in your budget numbers, so something is wrong with those numbers.
Yeah, we'll look at those. I was looking at it too. I'm scratching my head a little bit, so thank you for
Okay.
offering.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Harry.
Just one quick question. On the fund balance, general fund balance, I can't remember, it's a Gatsby 54 or whatever, requires a lot of different classifications of fund balance. The fund balance you're showing here, is that totally unreserved, unappropriated, unreserved?
I think I used the terminology of unassigned balance. So
Okay.
yes, that should be after any,
So it's not earmarked for anything in specific, it's open for whatever uses the council
Correct.
deems? Okay.
Well, that breakout is on the balance sheet only though, right, Ken?
the unassigned,
Yeah.
yes, that's the only
Yeah,
place it's
the
really
other,
used.
the 5 different categories of fund balances only appear on the balance sheet. You won't see them on an income statement.
I wasn't looking for it, I was just, for information, wanted to know whether it was. Thank
But
you.
that number there, I assume, represents everything you've got in those categories, right? If you have numbers, I recall last year you had numbers in 3 different categories on fund balance in the general fund. This
Yes.
number here would represent all of those.
It would, yes.
Yes. It's not broken out.
Oh, wait, question. I thought you were saying none of these were reserved for anything, not broken out into different reserves. So just for clarification, which is it?
They're unencumbered, but there's different types of revenues. But these are unencumbered, correct?
Well, I think he's referring to the fund balance, though.
Yeah, the fund balance, not whether it's unencumbered, but whether or not it's been reserved or earmarked for any other purposes.
No, I try to use the terminology unassigned balance. And that should tie to when we present it in the annual financial reports and we show total net fund balance and then reserved or certain items designated or committed.
So out of this figure, 4,600,000, almost 4,700,000, how much of that is not committed for other purposes?
The 4.7.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, and that's part of the reason I made the entry about the receivables and inventory, because that is part of what we show is unavailable funds. But there are no large commitments or other reservations by the council.
And I'd like to say that I do like the format. The summary is much easier to digest than all the details before, with the caveat that there is major items listed as to what made up those summaries. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody down here? Andrea, you got any questions? Amber? A lot to digest here. Okay. I guess no further questions. We'll move to review the budget calendar.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think we need a motion to recommend that the resolution R-1901 is approved by the Budget Committee, recommended by the Budget Committee to the City Council.
I don't see that on my agenda.
No, we generally do that at the end, after we discuss it, because, that recommendation goes on to the City Council.
Excuse me. Who made the motion and who seconded?
Ed?
I made the
motion. Bruce? Made the second.
Thank you.
I think it's redundant, but I don't care. I'll call for a vote on all those in favor of the motion signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Aye. I think it's redundant. We don't need to do it. We don't approve resolutions, only the city council does. We had this discussion last year as well. Now we'll review the budget calendar and discuss the next meeting date.
Okay, I have drafted the budget calendar. This will also be on the city council agenda for Wednesday night. I've tried to follow pretty much the pattern we did last year. I did add a meeting because I didn't know if you'd want to consider discussing like what you think are budget challenges and priorities at this meeting, but I did allow for a meeting on the 14th. So we could either meet again next Monday night, unless you want to go ahead and discuss it now. I don't know how involved a discussion you want to.
I'll leave that up to the discretion of the committee if they want to wait till next
That is the only
week.
agenda item that I'm expecting to have next week.
That's the only agenda item you expect next week? Well, then we may as well wait till next week, right?
I will be out of town next week. I won't be available next week. Just so.
So you want to discuss it now?
Well, I won't be here next week to discuss it, is all I'm saying. If you want to wait till next week, that's fine.
Well, it's up to the committee. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not a decision I'm going to
No,
make
I'm just, if the
unilaterally.
committee wants to wait till next week, I'm okay with it. I'm just saying I won't be here next week.
I would also add that the next meeting was scheduled for March 11th. And even by March 11th, it's so early in the budget cycle that if you had input or things that you particularly wanted to address, it's before staff really starts compiling their recommendations. So you may just want to defer that discussion until March 11th.
So we actually got a couple of months then. So you probably would be here for the March 11 discussion.
I would hope so, yes.
Well, I guess the consensus is we'll wait till the 14th and then probably talk about it more in detail on March the 11th.
That sounds
I think he's saying he wants the meeting. Do we understand you do intend then to meet next Monday night? Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
I just want to ask the board if there's anything that we feel that we need to bring up next week, or should we wait until we have a better idea of where the city council and the staff is going and do it on March 11th?
I'd agree to that.
You may not have the meeting on the 14th at all?
Correct.
Yeah, that's the way I feel.
And I'm kind of
That's a good
okay.
idea.
I'm kind of okay with that too. Yeah, I don't see any need to meet next week.
I'm
We can wait
okay
till-
with that.
We can wait till the
Wouldn't break
11th.
your heart, would it, Ken, not to have a meeting on the 14th? Wouldn't break your heart not to have a meeting on the 14th, right?
And it would save staff time and effort.
Let's just do it March the 11th, then. That seems to be the consensus of the committee.
Agreed.
Anything else on this calendar? Anybody saw that they have anything they'd like to talk about? It's pretty much the same thing every year. Okay, I guess we've settled that. What was that date? 3/11. 3/11.
Could I just ask a general
Sure.
question that might lead towards the 11th? The property on Indian River Drive that we purchased from Mrs. whoever, I forget. her
Sullivan.
name. Yeah, Sullivan. Yeah, thank you. Are there any plans for that in the upcoming budget year? Or is that just gonna,
Mr. Chairman.
Go, please.
We don't have any dedicated plans. I've shown it to one developer, and they're kicking the tires on it. I've been approached by a real estate agent that has a prospective buyer for it as well, and they said they would get back to me after the first of the year, so I expect a call from them. So we're at let's see what the market's gonna bear and bring that to council once we get some ideas. And we did a CRA plan on what would like to be seen down there, so we know that some retail, maybe restaurant, something of that nature may be a benefit for that location. Mr. Grissom is selling his property next to it. That may make it more advantageous for someone to pile those two properties together and make a more substantial development to bring more attraction down there. So the market's going to kind of dictate some of that, but we're going to maintain that the river side is a clear shot for the river, so.
Based on what you said, it sounds as though the idea is to sell the property.
Well, we'll always take in offers. I don't think the council ever wanted to have it as a city property. They just didn't want that property. My understanding is they didn't want that property to sell with the riverfront property to sell to keep the view of the river. We've combined that property on the river with another, so we are able to sell that property if the council decides to do so.
well, let me just go back. So the property on the east side of the road that's along the river has been separated out from the western side where the buildings are?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it was combined with another piece that we
Yeah,
had on
that
the
would
river.
make sense with what the objective was to keep that open down there along between the bathrooms and the other buildings there before the tiki bar.
Yeah, the goal was my understanding, and it was done before I was here, that the city council and the residents were pretty adamant they wanted to keep that view of the river undeveloped. And so that was why the decision was made to purchase that property, but to purchase it, you had to purchase both at the same time. So we've separated that out, and that gives us an opportunity to look at some potential development of that site. But we want to make sure it's the right development.
Hey, just one more. Speaking of the view of the river, does the city have any responsibility to get that sailboat that's been docked there south of Tiki out of the water?
That's a whole maritime issue that you don't want to bail into because and I mean that pun intended. It becomes a logistics, environmental, and it becomes a nightmare to get involved in that. That's waters of the state.
It's more or less a state issue, correct?
It is. The state will try to pawn it off and try to get municipalities to take on that responsibility. I reckon, and again, this isn't a budget committee purview. I'm answering your question. I don't think it's something I would recommend council.
My idea, I mean, is that something we put in the budget or we're trying to stay out of it?
I would stay out of it because it becomes maritime law, it becomes liability. There could be a whole host of things that could come along with trying to remove that, and to notice the people who own it and the expenses to it have other ramifications. So I would recommend that we not do that. We can push DEP and FWC into trying to look at getting it excavated, but there's all along there, if you look at the spoil islands, there's vessels on numerous of those that's been there for years, and so it's a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
You can always make it a legislative agenda item.
We did, we in the Indian River Lagoon, we've talked about some of these things. In the management plan for the Indian River Lagoon, it addresses some of that, that mooring and all of those things and how we address the overall health of the lagoon. And so I think we're going to make strides on that, and that's something we can talk to Dwayne to bring up in the legislative priorities. Is we talked about the moorings and the checking for the pump outage and things like that. So we'll be more than happy to do that.
Okay. Any other general discussion items by any members? Nancy?
I got a quick question.
Sure.
It's a budget item. Do we assume that the fire marshal resides here in Sebastian?
It does as of today. There will be a meeting on the 23rd with City Council for a presentation to see if they want to continue with that, but that's going to be a conversation we'll have at a hearing with the City Council.
But we're operating it now?
We are operating it currently today.
Okay. And if we're going to, then obviously that'll show up in the budget.
Well, it won't show up in the budget because it's just part of the building officials.
It's part of the building department, right?
Yeah, it's part of his salary and his duties under the building official.
Okay, so there's nothing additional that's needed?
Only some training and some recertification dollars that need to be in place.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi.
Andrea?
Yes, I do. I see where people are interested in the lagoon and the our waterways and the pesticides that we're using in the canals. They brought it up at City Council meeting. So I was just wondering if we were going to try to do something to help these people, because I don't think the alternatives will ever be approved by the EPA. So I don't know if we could try to get away from St. John's and try to do it ourselves. I think we used to do it, didn't we?
Whether we do it ourselves or we follow St. John's, we follow exactly what the Environmental Protection Agency has approved, and we follow the guidelines that the restricted and special use pesticides require you to do by the Department of Agriculture. We follow all of those regulations and mandates, whether we do it in-house or we contract. Those contractors are responsible for following those. And those, there's some differences of opinion, and so that's all I can say about that. We're following the guidelines, and our contractors are following those guidelines. And the safety and the health of the waterways is the most important, and that includes cleaning out the noxious vegetation.
But can we do it less harmfully? Can we really look?
Well, that's a matter of debate whether it's harmful or not. So, and that debate, it will go on forever, and I don't think that's a place for this committee.
All right.
Okay. Harry, you got anything else? Public comments. I see no members from the public here, so Next on the agenda is adjournment. Any further business for the good of the order? This meeting's adjourned.